Well, the toys are back in town for the fifth time. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's movie review of Toy Story 5. This brings in, of course, Andrew Stanton as director. Okay, so in this fifth iteration of the Toy Story franchise, Toy Story 5 is basically Jesse's story, to be fairly honest. Yes, Tim Allen, yes, Tom Hanks, yes, a lot of the same actors have returned as voice actors, but this story continues the kind of narrative that we saw in Toy Story 2 about how Jessie feels every time she feels left behind, like she was with Emily, her original owner. And this story basically follows Bonnie, who is the young girl who's now kind of adopted all the toys, basically finding herself as an outcast who in the process gets a tablet, who of course is voiced by Greta Lee. And what ends up happening with technology and how, we view technology and stuff like that, she becomes obsessed with it. She has friends, or she thinks she has friends. And so Jessie, trying to reconfigure everything, basically finds herself back at her old farm where she meets three new kind of old school technology toys voiced by people like Conan O'Brien. And in the process, she has to learn to kind of coexist with technology as well as kind of reconcile her life when she was, of course, with Emily, and how it kind of coexists with one another. In this movie, like the Toy Story movies, basically sees a world where things are changing, and how do you change with it, and how do you accept that change, but also how do you find your place in the world, as most Toy Story movies do. It of course has, once again, Buzz and Woody dealing with the scenario of that situation, trying to deal with the lily pad, which is the tablet. And then it sees another storyline with a bunch of Buzzes who are Buzz Lightyears, who are more high tech, have Wi-Fi technology, and it kind of wraps itself into how technology is kind of integrating itself into the world of kids and how that affects the toy world in a lot of respects. So it's basically what you see, how toys start feeling kind of outdated and how they need to find themselves in kind of readjust into the world that is, technology and stuff like that. But once again, this is Jesse's story more than it is Buzz and Woody, who kind of have concluded their story in a lot of respects. So that's what Toy Story 5 is dealing with. I'm going to be fairly honest with you. After Toy Story 4, I was a little despondent on why they needed to do Toy Story 5. I truly think Toy Story 3 was the capper of this franchise and should have ended there. But I get it. It makes money. It's a $1 billion franchise, at least Toy Story is. And it's a movie that, they were going to make because they make money. I mean, they've pretty much been on a downward spiral of turns ever since the pandemic because, they just don't make a lot of money anymore, to be fairly honest. So Toy Story 5 feels like a safe return to make money, at least $1 billion and so on and so forth. And I'm going to be fairly honest, I don't think the trailers were very good for this movie. But Andrew Stanton, I have a lot of faith in. I think he's probably, outside of John Lasseter, maybe Pete Docter, probably the most consistent director when it comes to his films, whether it be Wall-E or Finding Nemo. Finding Dory was alright, but I mean, it was still a pretty entertaining movie. So with that said, I was still going to watch this movie because Toy Story is literally one of my favorite animated franchises of all time. And going into this, once again, a little skeptical, but I'm here to say that this movie continues the fantastic nature of not only Andrew Stanton, but the fantastic nature of creating real, true emotions through a toy franchise, to be fairly honest, because of course, the toys in Toy Story 5 are very famous at this point. I think what this movie's genius move to do is that have Jessie be the main character, because the one thing that this movie franchise has done is it takes human emotions, runs it through a toy, and allows you to feel the heart of that, the heartbreak and the nature of being left behind and lost and finding yourself in the place in the world. Toy Story 2 was about Woody trying to find his place in the world, and Toy Story 3 is where do we go once, the people we love get older and they move on. And Toy Story 4 is, of course, finding the place that you are most accepted, and how do you move on from that. But what I think Toy Story 5 does that Toy Story 4 didn't is it goes back to the roots of what made Toy Story great. It allows one particular character, not a whole bunch of characters, to be the focus, to be fairly honest. And I think Jessie, the character of the cowgirl, is one of the most interesting characters that Toy Story has ever created, because there's a level of depthness to her character. There's a level of heartbreak. There's a level of, worry. There's so many human emotions that run through Jessie that I don't even think Buzz or a lot of the other characters get outside of maybe Woody, that is portrayed perfectly. And I think Joan Cusack does a really fantastic job of portraying those emotions. And I think the Andrew Stanton understands that Jessie probably is the most emotional core of this franchise. Buzz Lightyear is the toy that sells, and Woody is the fun, kind of energetic character that has to go through a lot of emotions. But I think his story ended, and I think allowing Jessie to have her story is a pretty smart thing to do. And you watch that when she gets to the farm, and when she meets Blaze, who's the young kid who now lives on the farm that Emily has. And I think it works. I really do. And I think it has a very great emotional payoff that really helps Jessie's story conclude in a lot of great ways. But don't get me wrong, this movie has a lot of great moments with Buzz and with Woody, and with the many Buzzes that show up are really funny, and having new characters introduced, like Smarty Pants, the Conan O'Brien character, who I think is a standout of this movie when it comes to the humor. But it really is Jessie's story. It really is trying to conclude Jessie's story in a lot of respects, and I think it does it really well, with giving us a lot of great kind of expansion upon her character, on what she is doing when it comes to like how Emily affected her, how she feels every time an individual moves on and becomes different, becomes a lot moving away from like how childhood represents us. And I think it's fantastic. And watching also Bonnie, who's voiced by, of course, a different young girl in this movie, is also fantastic, because she wants to be accepted. She's very different. She loves playing with toys when kids are now into iPads and technology, and we watching her have to deal with the fact that she struggles to maintain that self-worth. And I think it's great. I love the same. It's the same thing with Blaze, who's the new girl in this movie, who does the same thing. She wants to be accepted, but she's very different. And I love that Andrew Stanton and the writers and the staff really understand that people are not all the same, that people want acceptance. And I think that's what Toy Story has always been about, is acceptance and about our belonging and place in the world. And it has a great payoff. And I just think it's a very emotional movie, to be fairly honest. I think the only issues I have with the movie are the fact that I think Tom Hanks has always been the embodiment of Woody. I mean, he's always been great. He's always been he's a wonderful actor. You can understand why they brought him back, because he very much is an embodiment of this franchise. But I'll be fairly honest, I don't think Tom Hanks' Woody character needed to be in this movie. I think it would have been fine as a small part, not really into the movie at all. There's a point where, of course, Jessie talks to him through a walkie-talkie. And I think that would have been fine, but they need Tom Hanks in this movie, because you can't have a Toy Story movie without Woody and Buzz. And I think the fact that Toy Story 4 concluded with Tom Hanks's Woody character going off with Bo Peep at the end of that movie is a perfect culmination of leaving Woody to go off and do that kind of thing. And maybe you have like shorts and stuff like that, but you see a moment in this movie when Tom Hanks' character, there's some funny moments with like his baldness and stuff like that, which I thought was pretty funny. But he comes into the movie and he feels so out of place in the story that is mostly Jessie's story. And then you have, and then Bo Peep comes in, and Duke Kaboom comes in, who's once again voiced by Keanu Reeves. And they just kind of disappear. And then at the end of this movie, Woody just kind of disappears, and it's just like, you really didn't need Tom Hanks in this movie, to be fairly honest. I get it. They paid him a lot of money, whatever. He's in the movie. It's fine. They have a couple great moments, but to be fairly honest, you could have just focused on Jessie, have a little bit of Woody pop up or something like that, and then disappear. I mean, it would have been perfectly fine. Actually, it wouldn't have made me that upset, because the movie really isn't, Woody and Buzz's story. That, and I think a lot of the toys that are so well known for this franchise get like nothing to do in this movie. They're stuffed in a box, and that's kind of the end of their story. They're just there they disappear for like half the movie, and I feel like, you know, having them there just feels like kind of, we needed to put them in there for a couple minutes, and that's good enough. But a lot of characters, you know, a lot of the actors passed away, which, you know, they had to be recast, stuff like that. But there's so many great characters in this franchise that just kind of disappear or are not used very much. And you bring in, once again, like the fourth movie and the third movie, you bring in a bunch of new characters, and they're more focused on than the characters that are more beloved. And as much as I like Conan O'Brien's Smarty Pants character and Craig Robinson and so on and so forth, I feel like those other characters get short shrifted. So that's my kind of main problems with the movie, is just a lot of characters either didn't need to be in the movie or just really kind of get like slighted to the side. But I think another thing about this movie that really is interesting is how I think Andrew Stanton and Pixar really feel about themselves and the place in the world, how they feel about technology, because they were at one point were the full force group of individuals that people focused on. People went to movies, see Pixar movies, people did this, and this, and now it's kind of shifted so that Pixar is off to the side, similar to like what Jesse feels. And here we have YouTube and, you know, of course, K-pop Demon Hunters and all this stuff that has become the thing in technology and tablets and, you know, phones and stuff like that. And here is Pixar trying to create entertainment and wonder, and their movies aren't doing anything anymore. And here's a story that I feel like Pixar and Andrew Stanton are trying to tell people, that you need to find friends, you need to find people in the real world, that technology is similar to Wall-E are not going to be the thing you want. Or I mean, they're not going to, they need to coexist, and you still need to find companionship, and it basically is that kind of struggle between the two. And I think they do it pretty well and pretty nicely. And it's also the fear of how technology is just taking away from everything and kind of putting us into this weird bubble that is a worry. And that's what, you know, Toy Story's always done. It's always looked at the real world and kind of summarized it into toys, into like fears and, you know, feeling left behind and stuff like that. So I kind of get what Andrew Stanton's doing, but I think this movie's wonderful. I don't really have to talk about the technology because Pixar creates some of the most beautiful looking movies. The score is really nice. Taylor Swift's song is pretty good, and I think the voice work, even though they feel the actors are definitely old and, you know, older, I guess you could say, and you could definitely tell it in their voice, I think they still have a lot of love to give. I hope this is the last movie in the franchise. I don't think it will be. But Toy Story 5 is what I would call a good step up from Toy Story 4. Still not as good as the first three movies. And I think it's a movie that is definitely worth watching. I think it's a great movie. I think it's a very emotional movie. It has its problems, but I think it's a good return to form, and I think that's because of Andrew Stanton. So that is my long-winded take of Toy Story 5. It's in theaters very soon. And yeah, it'll make $1 billion. So what can I say? So there you go. Anyways, with that said, that'll do it. I do appreciate your watching of this long video. In the comments below, what is your favorite moment of Toy Story? What's your favorite Toy Story movie? Mine's still 1, but I'm very nostalgic for 1, so there you go. But with that said, if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome. Hit that like button, and as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.